Hello, Year 11. So here is your fifth lesson, revising A Christmas Carol, and we're going to move on to the start of Stave 2 today. So firstly, I'd like you to recall last year what we learnt through the word philanthropic. So what does it mean to be philanthropic, and how is Fred presented as philanthropic in the novel? Remember, Fred is Scrooge's nephew who we meet in Stave 1. Last week we looked at this idea of forbearance. So can you remember about how Scrooge shows forbearance in Stave 5? So think back to what we learned last year when we finished reading the book. How does Scrooge show forbearance in Stave 5? And our new word, or one we're going to remember from last year, which I'm sure we looked at, is reclamation. How does Jacob Marley begin Scrooge's journey of reclamation? Now, reclamation means restoring someone or something to a better state. So it's reclaiming Scrooge's soul, changing Scrooge's soul into a better state, the state that it once was originally. So you can pause the video and just jot that down. So pause the video again and have a go at answering these three questions. So if you are philanthropic, you are very generous, very kind, very social. You are thinking of others, giving to charity. Now, Fred is presented as philanthropic through the big speech that he makes about Christmas being a kind, forgiving, charitable time, but also through his attitude to Scrooge, the fact that no matter how horrible Scrooge is, he will not give up on him. In Stave 5, Scrooge shows forbearance through his changed attitude to those around him, to Fred, going to visit him and make amends, to Bob Cratchit, giving him a raise, and equally giving money to the charity workers. So we see that this is a quality Scrooge does not have in Stave 1, but a quality that he grows to have by the end of the book, because we know that this book is about Scrooge's redemption, the journey to the restoration of his soul. So he can hopefully, when he dies, not end up in purgatory like Jacob Marley, but in fact go to heaven. Now, Jacob Marley begins Scrooge's journey of reclamation because he shows Scrooge what will happen to him if he does not engage in this chance he's being given, essentially by God. God is the one sending these spirits to him. So Jacob Marley very much begins this journey, this spiritual, moral journey that Scrooge goes on from Stave 2 to 4. So today we're going to revise the significance of Scrooge's childhood experiences in Stave 2. We're going to remind ourselves what Scrooge's childhood was like, how Dickens uses language to present Scrooge's childhood, what Dickens' intentions are, and how this links to the context of the novel. So pause the video now, please, and jot down that knowledge goal. So quickly, we are going to just have a look at the Ghost of Christmas Past before we focus on Scrooge's childhood, just to ensure that we are reminding ourselves of the spirits. So this is Stave 2. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand, not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them. As close to it as I am now to you, and I am standing at the spirit at your elbow. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Now, this ghost is described in a very bizarre way. Because it represents the past of everybody, it is both male and female, both young and old. So it never seems to stay to have one appearance. It instead changes and flips between appearances here. So it's like a child, but also like an old man. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on its skin. So again, it's got white hair as if it's old, but its face is chubby and unwrinkled. The arms were very long and muscular. The hands the same, as if its hold was of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were like those upper members bare. So it has very long muscular arms and hands, but very delicate feet. Now, sounding horrendously stereotypical, but we need to remember the time this was written in. We have again possessing what are stereotypically considered to be both male and female traits. It wore a tunic of the purest white. There is so much light imagery with this ghost, with all the ghosts, but particularly with this one. We know that we associate light imagery with pureness, innocence, and goodness. And round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly, so we've got that representation of Christmas in its hand. And in singular contradiction to that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. So again, it's representing both winter and summer. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head, so from the top of its head, there sprung a bright, clear jet of light by which all this was visible. So this ghost, like a lamp, if you like, radiates light off the top of its head, like a halo in those old-fashioned religious paintings, and which was countless the occasion of its using in its duller moments a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arms. Now, an extinguisher is what they would have used to put out candles in these times. Think of it like a metal cone that on again with a handle that you would go and use to put out flowers. So it has for a hat something it can use to dim its light. And we're going to talk about the symbolism of those two things. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality, for its belt sparkled and glittered. We know light imagery equals good. We've had that with sparkling eyes of Fred in stave 1. Now in one part and now in another, and what was light in one instant at another time was dark. So the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again distinct and clear as ever. So what we have here is, again, it's changing and flitting between these different things all the time. Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me? Asked Scrooge. I am. The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being close beside him, it were at a distance. Who and what are you? Scrooge demanded. I am the ghost of Christmas past. Long past? Inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish nature. No, your past. Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap and begged him to be covered. Now, looking at the spirit's light is uncomfortable to Scrooge. He desperately wants the spirit to put on this extinguisher hat to dim his light. Now, what we have here is, through this symbolism of light and dark imagery, what Dickens is doing here is representing the darkness of Scrooge's soul, because it probably says something about me that I've read too many vampire books in my life, that I'm immediately thinking about this whole idea that vampires can't stand holy objects or can't go into church because vampires are considered evil. It's this whole idea that Scrooge is so dark in his own soul that seeing the purity and the goodness and the light of this spirit is uncomfortable to him. You know, he's not going to burst into flames because he's not demonic, but it's uncomfortable for him. So this is, you know, quite an important little part of this book. So we're going to switch back to the lesson and the PowerPoint now. Sorry, I have to tediously upload it again, as you know. And we're just going to answer a couple of questions, or I'm going to ask you to answer a couple of questions then. So why do you think Dickens chooses to describe the ghost in this way, that he's sort of both young and old, representing winter and summer, male and female? What does the light and the extinguisher cap it carries symbolise? Why does it hurt Scrooge to look at the light? So can you just pause the video, please, and just answer those 3 questions? So next we're going to have a little look at Scrooge as a child. We're not going to read all of it. We're just going to sort of look at some snippets. And then we're going to come back and answer these questions. So again, switch back over to the visualizer. So we're just going to go right on the bottom here. So the ghost has taken Scrooge's hand and led him into his past, this sort of little country scene, really. Good heavens, said Scrooge, clasping his hands as he looked about him. I was bred in this place. So, this is where I grew up. I was a boy here. The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odours floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares, long, long forgotten. So even smelling, the flowers and the air and seeing this place where he grew up is reminding Scrooge of all these thoughts and feelings that have been long forgotten. Your lip is trembling, said the ghost, and what is that upon your cheek? So essentially, Scrooge is crying or has tears in his eyes. He's that emotionally moved. Now, this is important because it's the first, real massive, true emotional, positive emotional outburst that we've seen, that Scrooge is even capable of feeling sadness. Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice that it was a pimple and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. You recollect the way, so you remember the way, inquired the spirit. Remember it, cried Scrooge with fervour. I could walk it blindfold. Strange to have forgotten it for so many years, observed the ghost. Let us go on. So we're going to skip over this bit, a little bit. What we have here is Scrooge being surprised. Why was he rejoiced beyond bounds to, see all these people he remembers from his past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroads and byways for several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas, what good had it ever done to him? So Scrooge is feeling joy in his heart at hearing others wish each other Merry Christmas, but then he's asking himself why, because Christmas has never given him anything. And we now understand, by the end of this section, why he feels that way. The school is not quite deserted, said the ghost. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still. Now, this should make you think back to Solitary as an Oyster, and you know how important this moment is. He's solitary, he's neglected, he's by himself, just like being solitary as an oyster. Scrooge said he knew it and he sobbed. So what we see here is, again, this idea that Scrooge almost represses all of his emotions. He sees and is reminded of how alone he was at Christmas, and he cries. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick with a little weathercock, surmounted cupola on the roof, and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes. So this is where Scrooge grew up, the boarding school. For the spacious offices were little used. Their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, their gates decayed. fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach houses and sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within, for entering the dreary halls and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold and vast. There was an earthly savour in the air, so it smells of damp, a chilly bareness in the place, which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight and not too much to eat. So we know that not only was Scrooge neglected and abandoned by his family, that he was also essentially grew up in poverty. So we begin to understand why Scrooge is the way he is. He was abandoned and neglected by his family at Christmas in a place like this. So maybe we can sort of understand why Scrooge is so obsessed with the gain of money. They went and the ghost and Scrooge across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by the lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading by a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he had used to be. So Dickens is suddenly creating a lot of sympathy for Scrooge. And we're going to skip this whole bit where he starts, remembering all of these book characters, and they were the only friends he had were imaginary from books. And we're going to skip to, so what the ghost does is he shows Scrooge some Christmases in the future, and we meet little Fan, Fred's mum, and Scrooge's little sister. It opened and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. I have come to bring you home, dear brother, said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. To bring you home, home, home. Home, little Fan, replied the boy. Yes, said the child, brimful of glee, home for good, home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be that home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home, and he said, yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you. And you're to be a man, said the child, opening her eyes, and you are never to come back here. But first we're to be together all the Christmas long and have the merriest time in all the world. So we learn some very, very, very important things here about Scrooge. Essentially, that his father is someone who is potentially quite frightening, because Fan says he's much kinder than he used to be, implying that he used to be unpleasant, and that home's like heaven as opposed to hell as it used to be. And that one night he spoke so kindly or gently to her that she wasn't afraid to ask if Scrooge might come home. Now, we don't ever know why Scrooge's father is like this towards him. A lot of film versions like to make stuff up here, but we don't know, and actually it's not important. What is important is that Scrooge has a negative relationship with his father. There's no mention of a mother, so we can assume she's dead. Fan is his only relative, that loved him, and that Scrooge spent many, many Christmases as a child by himself when everyone had gone home for Christmas in this poor boarding school. So the last thing that we're going to read is he talks a little bit about Fan. Always a delicate creature whom a breath might have withered, said the ghost, but she had a large heart. So she had, cried Scrooge. You're right, I will not gainsay it, spirit, God forbid. She died a woman, said the ghost, and had, I think, children. So Fan is dead in the present. She died at some point after giving birth to Fred. We don't know when. One child, Scrooge returned. True, said Ghost, your nephew. Although Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, he answered briefly, yes. So essentially what we have here is Scrooge being reminded how much he loved his sister, how much his sister loved him and showed him kindness when no one else did, and that actually he's reminded that he completely ignores and rejects fans only child. And, you know, that should rightfully make him feel guilty. So the last thing I'm going to ask you to do today is to pause the video and answer these questions. How does Scrooge initially react when he sees the school and its surroundings? How is the boarding school described? Why do you think Dickens chooses to present the boarding school in that way? Was Scrooge happy as a child in the boarding school, and how do we know? What is Scrooge's relationship like with his family? How does Scrooge react when he's reminded of his past? Why is this reaction significant? And what does this passage psychologically reveal about Scrooge's behaviour as an adult? If you need help with any of those questions, I have explained it all. You might want to sort of skip back and rewatch my explanation of some of the bits that we've watched. If you can't answer all the questions, that doesn't matter either. Just answer the ones you can, or if you have any questions, do please message or email your class teacher. Okay, so I'll leave you there and I'll see you next time.